So now look at the risk. What is the risk basically? So people sometimes confuse two of them, hazard and risk, together, and they cannot conceptually distinguish between two of them. But they are totally different things. So first, what was the hazard? Hazard was basically something physical. It may be situation that physically exists. It may be condition physically exists. It may be object that physically exists. But the risk itself is not physical something. Rather, it basically is the description of the characteristics of the hazard. Which characteristics? Number one, likelihood. Second, severity or consequences. So now let's define the risk. So basically, risk is the likelihood of a hazard causing harm and combined with the severity of the potential harm. So basically, what the risk is? Risk is basically the description of the likelihood that whether or not the hazard will trigger. Second, if it triggers, then what will be the outcome, probable outcome. So combination of these two things, we call it the risk. It, so risk is basically the combination of likelihood and consequences which belongs to the hazard. And also, as the conditions or circumstances changes, both of these may change along with. Also, as the circumstances or conditions changes, the hazard remains the same, but the overall risk value or level changes along with the conditions or circumstances. So now let's understand it with a very interesting example of the hazard line. So just suppose you go to the visit the zoo and you visit the lion there. So we know that lion is a very dangerous hazard. But what do you think at the zoo? What is the risk level of this hazard? So in these conditions, its capacity to harm you is minimal as it is controlled. It needs to become out of the cage and then it can harm you, but it is cage. So the probability or the likelihood or the capacity to harm is controlled. So that is why the risk level is very low. But just imagine that if the somehow the same line comes out and in front of you. So now what do you think? What is the risk now? You see, immediately from the minimal risk to the risk has gone to the very high. Now, likelihood of it will target you is very high. Also, the consequences are also very high. So you see, basically the risk, what is the risk? Risk is basically the characteristic of the hazard under the conditions. As the conditions change, risk may be high. As the condition change, it may be low. So I hope now you have a very good understanding, clear understanding of both concept hazard and risk. As we understood that hazard is something physical, condition, situation, or the object. But the risk is basically the property, emerging property of the hazard with the conditions or circumstances. As the circumstances or conditions change, the risk also change along with them. So risk is basically the emerging property of the hazard, and hazard is basically something physical that may cause you harm. Let's further understand with the scenario. So here you see a safety officer is finding a risk. So there is an activity he is looking at, paint activity. So here you see that instead of providing a safe platform, they just made a platform using a plank which is balanced by the weight of his co-workers. So looking at this activity, what anyone will think? Number one, uh, clearly it is visible. Common sense will tell us it is unsafe act. There is no protection to save this worker. And also this is very dangerous to do that. So what is the probability the worker will fall? It is certain. Any little smallest of the distraction or circumstance change in circumstances will result in the fall of the worker. So you see, these factors that we thought here are based belongs to the likelihood. They are describing the likelihood of the event or probability of the event that it will occur or not. Now let's look. This is called likelihood. Now look at other factors. What if the worker falls? He will die. Maybe. Maybe his bones will break. Maybe he will be disabled for lifetime. Maybe we have to bear the different costs, medical costs, fines, compensation, etc. So you see, now these factors that we now describe, which are the consequences that may come across in the case of the incident. So these things are called consequences, outcomes. So by combining the likelihood and consequences, what we get? We get the value of the risk.